Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for inviting me to talk about this one. I might not be a supply background person, but supply chain is very dear to my heart. And today, I would like to talk about why on earth is not supply chain taken more seriously on too many boards. I'm a Finn living in Denmark, which means I will be very black and white today. So for only engineers, I know it's sometimes very tough because it will sound like there's only one truth. And of course, there is only one truth. But bear with me, and this is all about it. So today, what I really want to talk about you is whenever I meet people who might not have an inside knowledge about what board really does, I want to start by the thinking and telling you what does board really do, and what are the key responsibilities on there. Then I want to talk about what the whole main thing is. Why are board not listening, or why are not supply chain invited or not part of the board as much? And what does it take for the board to be heard on the board, or the supply chain to be heard on the board level? And then there might be some people here who have a little board member somewhere sitting, and they might want to enjoy the career of going to a boardway as well as a supply specialist. I'll give you some tips about that one in the very last part of today. And that's of course in my own interest, because as it was said, I do tend to have supply members on my board. Very shortly, reason I'm talking about here is that I have a significant amount of board experience. I think I've been sitting in nearly 20 boards so far. I do this full time now. My background is from the commercial, from P&G, Procter & Gamble, Reckitt Benckiser. I worked in retail and Synoptic. And as you say today, I have a quite nice portfolio of company, of which most of the companies I'm chairing. As a couple of companies I would like to take up from here is the TCM, which is a kitchen business. It was IPO'd, put in the stock listing market last November. And as a Finn, I always have to mention Altia. You know, as a Finn, what can you have better? You have vodka in your CV. And to balance the vodka, I have some food in the Paulik and Santa Maria way. But also those two companies are one of these that really, specifically in Altia, on turning around Altia before it was IPO'd, supply chains played a key role. And it is one of the boards that when I was appointed as a chairman of the board, after having been a board member first, the first thing I did is I went in and recruited a supply person to the board, because I needed that competence. I'll come back on that one. Then I have some other boards which you might know. Footway is a pure e-com player, extremely interesting because it's fully automized. To all type of ways, and then of course I try to keep SAS flying, if nothing else, just by traveling around with all my board positions from Copenhagen. But we had the best ever quarter just, so I think we're doing fine. Interesting to mention, I'm part of the faculty on CBS, Copenhagen Business School, on exactly on board matters, and that gives me a great opportunity to, together with the professors, to learn. So I think I have a quite good background to do this one. Today, I know you're going to be able to ask me some questions. Reason I do this kind of things I do here today is for you to ask me questions, because those questions will help me to question my knowledge. And so I'm looking forward to a really good questions later on today. Now, very quickly, what is the responsibility of the board? The board sits in a kind of middle of everything or middle of nowhere. What is really, really important to understand, board does not have any own wish. Board is the owner's extended arm to take care of their business and create value on the money the owners have chosen to put on the company, no matter what kind of ownership structure it is. And that is extremely important, it's what it is. In the optimal world, and in Sweden is one of these countries where you do usually work with the nomination committee, when the owners actually appoint the board members, versus in some of the other European countries where the board tends to nominate themselves. But it is a very key on that one. But the board is in the middle. In a listed company, the chairman is the key talk person to the owners outside of what is in the listed meetings, and talks with the owners and ensures that there is an understanding of the owners. The other key part is all the other stakeholders that you have to manage. And yes, it is a combined thing with the management and the board, but there are some stakeholders which are more board oriented versus those which are more of a management oriented. So that's where the board sits. Now, board in the end has 3 and only 3 key things. We do a lot of other things, but if there is a 3 key responsibilities the board does, and I'll talk about these ones very shortly, all of them. The absolutely most important thing the board does is to ensure that the company has the right management. Right CEO, and today nearly all companies, a chair will also be there as a godfather to make sure the rest of the EMT is aligned with that one. And all the boards today basically go and review the management on the 2nd level or even to a 3rd level on that one. But that is the key job. Why is that the key job? It doesn't matter how good the strategy or good the company is, good the products is. You have a lousy management, the results are lousy. It's been shown so many times that if you take a good CEO and change it to a bad company, the bad company will change. It's not the one person thing, but it's the pyramid that plays. On the other hand, if you have a great company and put a bad CEO leading it, you will ruin it. That is the first and foremost important, that one. The second thing is about ensuring there's a right strategy. I'll come quite much more about that one, but it's also ensuring there's an execution of the strategy. And the last thing is about risk management, ensure that all the assets are managed right and rightfully on the company. Talk very shortly about all of these ones. Now, the whole CEO thing goes very much as you all who have a managers. Actually, it's not the way that the board has a performance review with the CEO, but me as a chair will have a performance review with the CEO. It is very, very important that you always have the right CEO on the right time. I have never yet met, what I just said, a bad CEO. I have met a wrong person in the wrong place in the wrong time. And that person can perfectly well work another function. The most key important thing, which you also have seen quite a few CEO changes quite the last couple of years, is do you need a wartime CEO or do you know growth CEO? It's a very difficult for a very good executor on the cost cutting to be suddenly a growth CEO. And thus there's a natural change of CEOs. Now, there's another point I would like to say. I have never ever heard a board to conclude that we fired a CEO too early. I've heard a lot of boards saying we fired them all too late. The tricky part is not firing a CEO who's doing bad. That's an easy one. The tricky thing is, when does the CEO's performance stop? So you change it just before it starts to decline. I think on all the boards I've worked, and I worked full time on the boards for 10 years, I can tell you one example we got it right on timing wise. All the other places, you tend to wait slightly too late. Now, same time, you have to ensure that you develop the CEO that is in there and ensure that gains the right things on that one. The second thing is very crucial, that it's not a one-man show. I talk about the CEO because legally, the right for the board is to ensure that the CEO is the right person, but it's the same thing about the top management. And we spend a lot of time now in the boards to talk about the next level on top management, both in terms of seeing is there a new CEO there, but also making sure that the team, you have an understanding with how the team plays on there. Now, on the top management team, I think all the boards, boards have a committee called Remuneration Committee, which is about the pay of the CEO. But what really is actually happening now, and in some of the boards we've already changed that word to an HR committee. So it's not just about remuneration, but it's all matters about the HR that the board should take care of that one. And that leads to the third point, which is ensuring you have key positions filled. You talked about talent today. In the boards that I do, we also ask the CEO to tell the remuneration or HR committee the other 10 key players, 10-ish, in the organization which are crucial for the company. Because very often the board who just looks the top forgets that there might be a specialist absolutely crucial for the company. And I am fully embracing in all my companies a system where we do give these persons long-term incentives, even if they might be very far down in the organization, as a way of keeping the talent. Now, the second thing is very much about doing the strategy. First and foremost, if you ever hear anybody in the management say the strategy the board made is wrong, you can only be sure of one thing: you have a wrong management. It is not the board that makes the strategy. Board might give you a certain marks where you have to play within, but it is the management who owns and does the strategy. Now, board involvement is key, and today most of the board works are doing in such a way that you don't anymore. You might do a yearly strategy conference, but you still work with strategy and specific items in all the board meetings, and you involve the board much earlier on than you would in the past. Now, one of the key things here is actually the strategy execution, and I think this is one of the places a lot of things go wrong. There's a company I'm sitting on the board. We did 2 acquisitions. Spot on acquisition strategically, got a good company, found a good company, paid a good price for them. And they were not supposed to be integrated, so it was kind of additional new division type of businesses. We failed miserably on getting them into the company. This is, of course, the biggest mistake that ever happens in M&A. Buying a company on the right price is not the difficult part. Getting it into the company is the difficult part. But what was really more irritating is that we as a board did not, if I take a learning on that one, have the right KPIs that we were following that could have shown us this issue earlier, that it actually then popped up. It popped up eventually because, as I will talk in a short while, it came up in the P&L, but we should have had KPIs which have helped us to see it before the sales started to plummet. But the key thing for strategy is both to ensure you have a strategy, but also in the execution. So this is the number 2 point that the boards do. And the third point, which I won't talk too much, but it's maybe one of the most important things that the board do. And why I won't talk too much, it's a lengthy list of things that the board has to do in order to make sure that the assets that the owners have given to company are right and rightfully managed. This is everything from risk evaluations, audit committees. This is about ensuring there's a policies. Do you need a whistleblowing orders? How is the safety, health and safety going? Things. I don't know about your companies, but if your boards do not have do not at least twice a year review your safety actions, I would question about your board's capabilities. One of the boards I work, we had an issue that we tend to always have some safety issues, and it went so far that the board reviewed them once a month. We didn't see the action needed. We made a system that in the future, and this is really funny, the supply chain guy who was responsible for the factories got to present to us every time there was an accident. It's made a bit revised pedagogic system. Took 6 months and we haven't seen him ever since. Because suddenly everybody knew in the organization that this is a really serious stuff that goes to a board level, and nobody wants to go up to a board for bad reasons. But that is a kind of thing that happens under the risk, if to give you a very specific item. Now, how does board really then work? This is about the key responsibility. What happens in the boardroom? A lot of things happens in the boardroom, but mostly and very importantly, everything starts with a P&L, the company's P&L, and the balance sheets, but first and foremost by the P&L. If you do not understand your company's P&L, you don't even need to want to go to the board level because you will be not having a very good presentation. I have this question to HR directors. They usually love me, not for reasons, and I always ask them, tell me where in the P&L, which line can I see your job, work done? Which line is improving because you're doing good HR job? And the HR directors usually just go in a panic. But there's a very good way of finding places, but you have to find these places. Everything that board does, CSR, if it is a HR, company, how the motivation or the employee situation in the company goes, it all goes to a P&L. If you cannot relate what you do to a total P&L, the board will not understand you. That's a black and white question, okay? Of course they will, but that is basically where we are. Same thing for balance sheet. It really is a numeric experience. And somebody say, why does it start from there? It starts because the board's work is to manage the assets and grow the value of the assets the owners have done there. So it has to start with numbers. Now, as we all know, that's all about historic numbers, but that's where it starts. So any of the company you go on, go to the and look at what is, if you don't have, depending what level you are, if you see the monthly report. If you don't see the monthly report, go and look how your company's P&L look. See where the problem is. If you want to have one hint from me, look how the gross margin year on year is developing. Whenever I enter a company, that's the number I look first. How is the gross margin? And if you do it in 2-3 levels, it doesn't really matter. How is the gross margin developing over time? Any company that the gross margin is going down to south is in deep trouble, because the only way of saving that company is cutting costs, and that we can't do forever. SIS was a good example of that. When I entered 2013 on that company, they had been cutting costs 10 years. They had not mentioned the word customer or consumer in the board, apparently for 10 years. Then they changed half of the board. We come 3 quite aggressive commercial people in there, and suddenly we start to talk about balance, about increasing the top line and the gross margin and cutting costs. And I think we're doing quite well on that one. We have a great management who took the thing and to that one. But so it's very, very important, that one. Another thing that I think hits you guys quite often, and I'll come back to that one, it is about, I just have to see how I go backwards. This way? Yep. If I look at the P&L here in that one, if I look at all these things, everything that is seen here is a cost. A lot of things that you do in supply chain from the board general perspective is costs. Costs are not good. The less cost, the better, okay? And that is also very much how supply chain is seen. You are the cost makers. You're the cost leaders. And that's why you very often get to talk to the board when your costs are going in the wrong direction. But let's come back on that one. But it really starts on that one. There's one thing I want to share with you, which is a bit odd, and which I always fight about. Most of the boards read the P&L wrong way around. They start from the bottom line. And when you start from the bottom line, you don't actually see what's coming in. The money is coming up from the top, and it's going out from the bottom because it's going to the owners one way or the other, or put in the next year. But that is one of the things that you also have to think. Yes, we talk about P&L, but most of the boards, because of what their job is, look on the bottom line first. I think another important thing about that one is you, as a supply chain, sometimes, you know, I made this, took this example somewhere, but it's a cogs. It's a mixed piece of things, and everything gets in there. A good companies, in my opinion, tend to have more than one gross margin, and they do gross margin 1s and 2s and 3s, and that usually helps the supply chain to explain what they actually do. I just have to say, I think I'll have it back in there. So the whole thing about what we talk about in there. Now, another thing is that I started my board career in a private equity setup. I'm very happy about it, because private equities are fully geared to increase the value of the owners, rather short term than long term. And short term, you know, usually today's private equities own things about 7 years. But that means you get very focused on ROI. In generally speaking, boards don't like our ROIs above 24 months. In exceptional cases, 48, and if it's a real infrastructure thing, then we can understand a longer period. Now, that puts some issues on the maintenance type of things, because usually the maintenance has no ROI. I mean, in terms of its, you know, if you do it or don't do it, it's very difficult to see in that one. But the ROI is a very, very important, and everything that the board does has to do one way about return of investments because of what we do. Now, today, at the moment, there are 3 things, actually 2 things in that sense, what are the focus area of the boards. You might figure out, I take to one thing. I talk about flexibility, I talk about speed, I talk about sustainability. I do not talk on this one, digitalization. Because digitalization for me is just another way of doing better flexibility, quicker things. This is not non-sustainable, but with a better margin. Digitalization is extremely important, but I take it a second level. It's not the goal per itself, it's how you get in there. And the other thing which is really bothering companies at the moment is a top line. It's a growth. There is a saying, a company doesn't grow, it's a dead company. Of course, company cannot grow for a while, but in longer term, any company that doesn't grow tends to die. You can't save a company to that one. And that's why at the moment, the biggest bother is a top line growth. And the reason for lacking top line growth is the change in the markets. I'll take example of retail. Retail, physical retail, is having a tough time. Is it because people are spending less? No, because all the growth is in the e-commerce part. So growth is really a trouble at the moment in the boards at the moment. Now, why are you guys not then heard on the board level? I already said you the first thing. Boards like to talk about positive things. You guys, you are the negatives. Your costs. And there's only one thing you want to do with the costs, that's minimize them. Now, I think this usually, I'll come back to you what you can do about it, but I think you can think about this one, and I'm knowingly quite negative. But actually, if you look at the P&L I showed before, you are the second line. The funny thing with the boards tend to be that they talk too little with both topics on the top of the whole P&L. They talk too little with the sales guys and the sales commercial organization, and they talk too little with the cost guys. The one because they don't understand it, and the other because they don't like the costs. Second thing is, in my opinion, and the biggest area that you don't get to talk, is you cannot see. And I'm really sorry I black and white this one, but you cannot really see anything else in supply chain. What happens on the sales side, the only time you handle that is when you have to deal in an S&OP with the stupid sales guys who don't know what they're going to forecast. Shit in, shit out, yeah? So you rather ignore them and don't look at them because they don't know their shit anyway, right? The second thing you don't look at that one is the other side. You've done, let's assume it's a product manufacturing thing. You've done some products. The end users are really irritating because they find mistakes on your products and then you have to do something else about that one. So if you can fix on your supply chain and don't look anywhere else, you're really good. That, per definition, has nothing to do with the strategy, which per definition does not allow you to come at all to the board level. So it's about silo thinking. I'll come back to that. We got to get out of this one. The other thing is, for some reason, and I think, no I'll excuse, I got into study engineering, I never started. So now when I'm going to say about engineering brains, excuse me, I have one of them somewhere still left. You're not generalists. You are very interested on a very detailed item on being specialist on a very narrow item on the board, on the company's strategy. That's why you are good. But if you can reach out and become a bit more generalist, you will understand the bigger goals the company has and the board issues what are there. Next time you meet anybody higher up, preferably CEO, ask the CEO, oh, by the way, in your last board meeting, what were the key issues? I mean, the CEO will most likely look at it saying, what happened to you? But it's a very good way of understanding what really, because it also happens to be whatever the board is concerned, that's really the CEO's problem. So if you can understand what the CEO's problem it is there. Then there is a bad habit. And I annoy this one really a lot. When I started my board career nearly 15 years ago, I tend to be the first commercial person in the boards. The boards were full of, if I'm really nasty, bankers, lawyers, and retired CEOs who love to come to drink a cup of coffee. And you can think that persons, they really, they like to talk about people, the same things. Luckily, we first got rid of the lawyers. I actually have a lawyer in one of my companies. I want to keep her there because she's really good. She's really useful on that one. I'll come back on that one. The old CEOs, luckily, sleeping on the meetings and not opening the board documents, they died by themselves. Literally. And basically the bankers, they got a bit too busy on 08 on all kind of banking scandals, so we got rid of them as well. So what I'm looking forward to me is you can really see it at the moment. There are still the old boards with the old type of board setting, but there is quite an amount of new boards. Being very biased, I would actually like to think about the private equities on this one, because the private equities really made a big difference by making a board responsible of what really is a board's responsibility in terms of value growth. And it can be, lawyers are great specialists, but they might have a bit difficult to say how do you grow a consumer good business or business to business business, and that what happens. Now, what does it then take for you to be heard on the board level? The first point is crisis. And you might want to think, oh my God, that's a really positive way of getting to talk to the board. never waste a good crisis. You've heard this so many times. Never waste a good crisis. When you have a crisis, volunteer to the CEO. I'll come and explain it. First CEO, so God, thank God I have somebody else to blame. But also you will take this opportunity to tell the board what you really do and how can you solve the issues. And if you manage to take away this approach, you can actually explain the board where the issue started. If it's about a factory burning down because you didn't do fire rehearsals, then you're in deep trouble. But anything else on that one, really take a use of good crisis. It could be a crisis about quality. It could be a crisis about health and safety. It could be a crisis of anything. I'm not telling you create a crisis, but find that is really the way suddenly board gets very involved and interested about things they usually don't talk, is when there is a crisis. Now, the other thing that I really think, I'm a big fan of supply chain. I said in the 3 boards I've gone, the 2 listed companies I'm chairing, the first knowledge I got to a board on top of the existing knowledge was a supply person. I'm a big believer of what miracles you can make on the boards. Now, why am I on that one? There's a lot of connections on the strategic matters. Sustainability. I mean, I work with Claes Olsson, who you all know, and I love the one thing we did right for Claes Olsson. The last thing on our sustainability agenda we did is to actually have a sustainability manager. Before that, it was part of the supply chain and purchase organization. So you actually started where it starts. Today, too many companies get a sustainability person, and then really, where's the reality? You are a key player on the sustainability area in most of the companies in very many ways. Ask and push that agenda, and ask to get the board to really tell them what really happens in terms of sustainability of the company. There is quite a few companies upcoming who have a really nice sustainability reports, and there will be crisis because the companies don't actually live up to what they think they live up to, or what the board thinks they live up to. Employee safety I already talked about. Taking ownership of that one. One of the big things coming on the world where the stress is the key issue we have is the employee health and safety. You have usually a big part of the employees in your organization. Use that, because that's another strategic matter coming up to the organization. Use the fact that you actually open you up on silos. I come on that one in a second. And that has to do with the fact, if you really take responsibility of the product quality, for example, you are taking more responsibility than just your area. That gives you a strategic reason to do it. So in general, I'm just giving some ideas here. Try to connect yourself better to the strategic agenda that the company has. Usually you end up being the second level who has to do the strategy that somebody else has kind of kindly drawn and asked you to do, and you are part of the to-do list, please fix. And you have to hire you up myself on getting into that one. Spread lean. Now, this is one. I love supply chain because of your lean thinking of anything. You're experts on that one. If you go to your CEO and to the board and explain how good they are in a lean, you might want to hint, how about doing headquarter lean? I've done it 2 companies. We took the supply person and put them to do headquarter lean. It worked fantastically. And again, lean is very much on the strategic agenda. So if you can take yourself and become the whole company's lean expert, also vis-a-vis this there, that's a very good way of that one. Now, the 4th thing is think on flows. Companies are very simple. There's basically 3 flows to manage. One is the consumer, how the money comes in. Everything about how they take their purchase decisions, how they take the action, the purchase, and everything. That's one flow the company has to ace. The second flow is the flow you are much more used to, which is basically the supply flow. If you ace the first, the second, the cash flow will nearly come by itself. Any company that you work has to only manage these 3 flows, and they will be perfect. Beiersdorf, old CEO, said, my life is easy. I just have to grow the top line by 3%, cut the COGS by 3% every year. I will do forever good. Kind of way, pretty simple. And the cash will come. I think this is all about what you have to think about. And if there are the 3 lines and you basically own the one in the middle, you should take ownership of that one. Now, my favorite, and I can't say which company it is because it's listed, and it's not mine, but my favorite supply chain director, I wanted to get him to one of my boards. Unfortunately, he didn't get allowance from his boss to sit on the board. He's a board of a consumer company, and he figured out that if he can produce the things 20% quicker, it allows the marketing department to match the campaigns in such a way that sales will increase by 35%, and that's what he did. It wasn't the marketing who came to him, it wasn't the sales who came to him, but he basically figured out by taking this way as a way, what happens with the consumers, what happens before I start to produce anything. And by then doing himself, this guy is really good. And I know why they didn't allow him to come to my board. It's because I think he's their next CEO candidate. So they want to keep him very, very tight to themselves. But that really shows how well you can do on that one. In the end, boards should only be strategically concerning about how do you do all these ones. Now, there's one thing about here. The digital world will make this much more visible. And the first flow is already very visible, even to the boards. I mean, if nothing else, you can follow, I mean, I do. I follow all the Facebooks of my companies. Let me put it this way. Following SIS, Twitter, and Facebook this summer when we had some cancellations wasn't a lot of fun. But as a board member, I had an immediate feeling what was going on there. So the first flow is already much more visible to the board members today. The second flow, trust me, will become much more visible. So hiding somewhere is not an option. Spent this morning in one of my companies actually going through this one. And the poor guys actually told me that they can see in 15 minutes, every 15 minutes they can see all the orders coming into us. I said, that's very interesting. How long does it take for us to answer to that order? We ship it 48 hours later. Why the hell do we ship it 48 hours later if the orders come every 15 minutes? This will be so much more visible in the future. And the external board, kind of all board portals, will actually go in, trust me, not tomorrow, but very soon, a way that the board can see the both operations as they are. Now, you have to think on flows. My optimal board member, coming to a fifth point, is a IT-savvy supply chain director. I love them. If I can find a personally, I think the old-fashioned IT, now I'm not talking about the digital flows and so forth, but all one ERP and everything, it should not sit under CFO, it should sit under supply chain. I have to give you one kick. I haven't seen very many supply chain persons who are digital savvy, who can IT. Now, it's not too late. If you can do something in the weekend, if you want to really figure out what to do, I'm not paid by this company, go to the Code Academy, start to do a coding thing, and you will understand a lot of things that goes in the digital world. Me and my children were competing of doing it. Of course I lost. I mean, the bloody 20 years old took the course in 6 hours, and 6 hours later I hadn't gone through the second bloody lection. But it forces you to think about it. It's not something, oh God, I don't know anything, I can't do it. I'm making it quite more black and white here, but you can do a lot about it. Make sure you understand what digital is, and what digital means for your supply chain. The example that I just said, I can actually follow my customers to figure out if my supply chain is working effectively enough, because we get the data. And then, always help your CEO to look smart. It's the best career advice I can give to anybody on any organization. Make your CEO to look smart. This is not about, excuse me my friends, ass licking. This is about understanding what the issues are your CEO has. Your CEO has X amount of issues, and if you know what they are, and you can be part of that one and solving them, you're going to be the hero. Now, one thing on this one, the best consultant I ever worked, and I know there's some consultants around here, was the one, whoever he called me, would ask me, what's your biggest problem? First 5 times I said to him, it's not in your area. He said, I don't care. If I don't know what's bothering you, I don't know if it's the right time to talk to you about now. And think the same way about your CEO. Understand what bothers your CEO. If he doesn't want to talk to you, I think you're the issue. Now, I think this one nearly comes as by itself. I would look for much more stronger leadership from supply chain. The supply chain has to come. I mean, sometimes I feel the supply chain, you know, if the management is like limousine, you guys sit in the last seat. You have to come forward. You have to start by leading yourself, by taking a strategic responsibility, by understanding digital parts, and master the basics. I still don't have a company with a good, okay, I have a company with excellent S&OP. I hate S&OP. But I have implemented myself as a CEO so many times. I know any company, the cost will go out of control if you don't have a good CEO, S&OP. For me, when the S&OP doesn't work, it's a supplies issue. Fortunately, not very many board members have had the hard way on that one. You have to get the basics right. And you have to bring that up to the strategy. Think about if the S&OP would be better. Most of the companies, the cost would be better, you would be the biggest hero, and everybody would be happy. I think what I talk about already is lead upwards about your boss problems, understand what's talked about, understand what's going upwards. I think you've talked about something training, but I want to say one thing. I used to in P&G be a leadership coach on a global basic. And one of the things that people misunderstand very often, they think leadership downwards. You know, they talk about how do I lead my people. The first thing about leadership is how do I lead myself? If you don't lead yourself, you don't know where you're going, forget about being good boss for anybody else. The biggest reason people in a higher level, on top tiers of the company fail, is not because they cannot just lead their people downwards, but they can't lead upwards. And that upwards leadership is something that should be trained much more, which is understanding how do you lead upwards. I'm not going to take that course now, but I really want you to think about that one. Now, I have one final thing today, and I think I want to use some time for questions. And this is maybe for you the most important thing that comes now for those who really want to see what it is. So what does it take? If any of you want to be a supply chain specialist and sit on the board, what does it really take? Now, I already said, I'm convinced that supply chain should be part of the competencies in the board. Let me say a couple of words about the board competencies. A good board, if they have 6 or 7 members, all the board members need to be generalists. That means they all have to first and foremost be generalists. What do I mean by that? They have to understand the P&L, they have to understand the strategic work, and the strategic way of managing company, and after that they have to be specialists. I am not a big fan of having any specialist on the board, pure specialists who don't have the generalist view on that one. There are very few exceptions of that one. But even the medical companies then have a blue ribbon panel, so advisory boards on side of the board, advising them maybe from outside about things that are specialist unit. A board member has to be first and foremost generalist. The second thing, when the board member is there, every generalist have to have their own specialist route. And I tend to say about, if we're 6 or 7 members, you should have about 2 commercial persons. You have 2 kind of financial persons, up to 4. If you have 3 mid positions, those positions should be filled by the specialists that are first and foremost generalists, but then specialists on the key competencies of the company. My first point in most of the companies is somebody from the supply chain. My second point, if I can have a specialist, if the commercial people don't fill it up, is to have somebody who has a specific sales knowledge. And then the third one is really company specific. I can't really tell you if there's 7 people how it is. Now you have to think about if it's 5 people, you have to downscale these numbers what it happens. But then it tends to be 2 to 3 generalists and 2 specialists. But for the supply chain being one of the specialists, you have to understand the P&L. If you don't have a course, there's quite a good courses on just getting to a financial management of any companies. You can do it very easily. Just go home and look at yours and your competition's P&Ls. When I go to the CBS and when I don't talk to the executive management courses, but when I talk to the students, I tend to ask the students, and of course I'm not asking this question for you guys because you of course know all the answers. What is a cross margin of a average medical company, branded med company, on that one? What's a cross margin, sorry, what's the EBITDA of a medical company? What's the EBITDA of retail company and some other companies? I usually ask airline as well. And I can see, think about it for yourself. Let's take the retail. We all go shopping food or whatever. What is the best ever food retail EBITDA margin measured as far it is official numbers? What would it be? Think of it for a while. Put a number in your head. I think the best number ever measured was at Tesco, 7.6% EBITDA. 7.6. Airline companies, if they're really good, they run on 2. Medical companies, or my favorites, which are the ingredients companies, they run on 30s. The ingredients companies are great, they run in 30s. But this is the range. The lower the EBITDA percentage, the less wave of mistakes there is. And just by understanding that one, look at your competition and look at your own P&L. It's really funny. When I was asked to join the board of SIS, I look at the P&L and I said, this is a retail company, not bloody airline company. The retail companies and airline companies' P&L looked exactly the same. Huge, big top line, a lot of zeros. Okay, cross margin, absolutely nothing in the bottom line. And that comes from the fact that they have a very high fixed cost in terms of retail, in terms of the stores. And then the second cost for both of them is people. Very much the same P&L. You will immediately figure out what's the issues with you and your competition if you do a cross margin, or if you look at the EBITDA margin. If you can see a proper cross margin, that's really good. Now I have to do one caveat for the retail thing. There is one reported retail that's doing better than Tesco that time. That's a Lidl in Finland. 3 years ago, they reported 11.6 on the local country. Think about what they do in headquarter. Outstanding. If you find companies which are outliers in your own industry, take a look at them. Follow them, find out what they are doing differently. Good way of many ways. Second thing, what it comes to the master digital supply chain. I've said this already before. Board level will be digital. And we'll think digital. We'll think about flows. We'll think about automation of flows. I'm a chair on the Footway, which is a pure e-com shoe company. And one of the reasons we're outstanding is that the CEO is logistic engineer. Because he understands the flow and he automates the flow. And we have a profitability that normally a company would be very, very jealous. Any other company having anything with the shoes don't understand it, because shoe is the one with the highest returns. But we manage the flows in such a way that we actually make money on that one. But you cannot do it if it's not automated and fully digitalized. Now, KPI management. Usually you guys are the best in the company of having KPIs. KPIs for me should be very different from the P&L numbers. Best KPIs for me are the numbers that gives you a prediction of the future. Of course, they can't tell you a future, because if it's measurable, it already happened. But they can give you a future on that one. I told you about the cross margin. There's one company we turned around by starting to follow each division and each division, subdivision on cross margin, one number for each division and one number aggregated. How was the cross margin developing versus a year ago? We could always find the bad guys, and then we talked about the bad guys, and we looked at the outliers, and we looked at what the outliers were doing very much better. But look at the KPIs. There is a lot to be doing that one. And try to understand the other divisions and other areas KPIs. Now, board work. The best board person I know is the one who can ask best questions. Now, you have now been able to hopefully write a lot of questions, so you can train to be a good board member. A good board member is not the one who has the most knowledge of everything, even if I ask for generalist. It's the one who can ask the right questions from the management. Because if the management figure out if there's a good question And the management in the room, whoever it happens to be in that point of time, CEO, CFO usually always, but also the EMT, if they don't have an answer, it's much more powerful for them to go home and learn. I don't like gray beer board members. You know, they're the one who know everything, seen everything, and so on. You have to be good on questions. Now, if you want to act on this wish, what do you do if you want to get a board member? What do you really, really physically do? First, you actually have to rewrite your CV. I didn't write it there. You have to point out the things that are strategically important that you're good at. How good you are on operational factors does nothing to do with the CV. So you have to create 2 CVs. The one you send to people when you have a new job, and the one when you have a board work. Then ensure that your network knows you would like to be have a board position. It can be tricky if you only network with the kinds like, sorry to say, same kinds. You might not have the board works on your thing. But if you are in the place where there's a lot of different competencies, say, one day I wouldn't mind become a board member. You can really take a training course for board. I don't think it's necessarily must. I don't actually think it's needed. But it's very good to understand what it means legally. You have to remember every board member is responsible by their house and their own thing of not doing the right things. Now, just one point on that. The right thing is not making stupid decisions. It's about not following the laws and the legal requirements that board has to be done. Do the board see? Go for headhunters. This is the best thing that has happened in the last 15 years. Most of the boards who think anything of anything do not anymore think, who do I know? You know, the old boys network, not just they became even older and died, but that's not very appropriate habit anymore. So go on and talk about headhunters. Usually headhunters quite higher up, and it's a quite easy way of contacting them. You send them CVs and an email and saying, I feel I'm ready for a board job. I would appreciate you to keep me in my mind. Keep me in your mind when that kind of position comes. It will come. And then grow no job. The higher up you are in the organization, for natural reasons, you have a better visibility on the strategic items, and for natural reasons, thus you will be able to qualify for the board jobs. So doing your job really well and getting promoted, actively seeking promotions. You all know the prince, this is more for usually, the prince or the princess on the white horse does not exist. They're not going to find you in your little cubicle somewhere. You have to go out and get those. Go for a bigger jobs, go for the headhunters, and then maybe one day I can employ you as a board member, as a supply specialist. Questions?
Questions, yes, we want questions. Bam! I like it. Okay, so do you dare send any questions? I hope so. Let's see, do we have any questions? Yes, we do. Okay, the first one. How important is business knowledge for the relevant sector for a board member?
Good question. I was yesterday in a other arrangement where a very senior, very, very capable board member said a board has to have at least one industry person. One. If we have 7 board members, it's not 7 industry people, but one would be good to guide them in there. Usually, actually, the issue is like an airline industry. We can't have anybody because they are working for competition, right? So, but having a person, one person of the 7, is very good.
Why had the CFO often been responsible for IT?
IT is costs. CFOs are good cutting costs. Historical reason, and it just happens because it's in there. And I would, strongly, it's just habit, bad habit.
Bad habit. Instead of supply chain seen as a cost, do boards start to talk about value chain instead, or value chain instead?
Yes and no, but that is really, it depends about the company. If the company talks about the value chain, the board will talk about the value chain. If the company, so it kind of grows within. If the CEO starts to talk about the value chain, the board has to adjust. But also comes from upwards. But upwards, it comes very much about this trying to understand the flows. So we don't necessarily call it the value chain. But if you push the value chain thinking upwards, it usually will stick.
And here we have a longer question. Since you were the only female speaker today, it would be interesting to hear your perspective on equality. Do you believe in gender quotas for company boards and for management positions?
No.
No?
I do not believe in quotas. A reason for this one is very simple. I would never want to be chosen to a board based on my sex. I much more will want to be chosen by my brain or what I can and capabilities. I think the direction is going fast to right direction in the board level. I mean, if you've seen the development, Swedes are doing pretty well. There is no quotas. Norwegians actually managed to ruin the whole female amount of management people by putting in quota, and they completely removed all the management people. There is, however, one thing, and it's not for quotas. I'm a big believer on management being have to put forward. Denmark usually goes backwards, and Danes are the worst on gender equality in Europe, on board level and in direct management level. Danes and Dutch. Portuguese are one of the betters, just to give you some kind of twist on that one. But I think that what I really like is the Danes actually made us say you have to report your intention of how many percentage of women you should have on boards and on management. And for the boards, I don't really care. I do really care about the management, because if we don't get females in the top management, the board thing won't hurt either. And we have to have the change within the company. I think the other reason I'm not for quotes is what I said first. Board is an owner's prolonged arm. If the owner wants to put monkeys on the board, they should be allowed to do so. So one of the great things that's happening actually is a lot of specifically on the public companies, there is somebody speaking up saying, how come? In Finland, they have now 3 companies, listed companies, don't have a female. The first question in every meeting, the General Assembly they have is, why don't you have a females? I've heard that the chairs of those companies saying, I'm sick and tired of this question. But if nothing else, I'll get a female so they stop asking me about that one. So the owners are facing the responsibility of getting a much more diverse boards. So do I think females should be in the board? Yes. Not on quote way.
But being, I mean, looking at you're a strong independent, your whole persona, you have experience, you have knowledge. What would you like to convey? Because it's not only about quotas sometimes, it is actually about females or women wanting to step up and take that position. So, I mean, we have some females, women in the audience, and also myself. What sort of knowledge or what traits or what recommendations would you say? These are the 3 things you need to, step into your power or self-leadership. I don't know what it is, but that you can just convey that is also soft skills.
I'll try to get very shortly. Females and young males are having the same issue. Yeah. So all the old males, you're safe. What I'm trying to say in this one is that you somehow have this, what I call the prince on the white horse syndrome. Females are not very good about self-promotion. And in Finnish we have a saying, who lifts the cat's tail if the cat not themselves? It's not about self-promoting something you don't do, but it's promoting what you really do. Let me give you an idea for all of you younger males and females around. If you have a performance talks, ask your boss to be the one who prepares the performance talk. So it's not your boss telling you what you should have done, or should do better or do good, but you telling your boss what you think you have achieved as the results and what you would like to become better. So taking empowering yourself and taking the leadership of that one. That's what works for everybody. But that's something that females somehow don't learn as much as males do during the very young years.
But luckily we're lifting the topic, so I think it's becoming more and more of a mindset.
I agree.
Okay, do you always prefer aftermarket customer service to be organized in supply chain?
No. Black and white, am I not? This really depends. Let's take an SAS, a good example. It wouldn't make any sense to have it in supply chain because it's about customers, and the customers are very public. So it really depends. In business to business, very often it makes sense to have it there, generalization, and business to consumer, maybe the opposite. But for me, it's a key that the supply chain feels ownership and understand what's in the customer service part. And again, customer service for me is, if you are responsible for customer service, if you still have not put a chatbot on action, do it now. There is so much chatbots can do to effectivize and get a better feedback on that one and doing better customer service.
Okay. What's your take on operation being organized and driven by their own P&L, separate from the commercial P&L?
That's a good question. Altia, which we IPO'd here, we had a huge discussion about this one. We actually have 3 divisions. We have the Finland and the exports. We have the Scandinavia. And then we actually have basically a what we call a contract manufacturing and supply chain. So in that sense, they have an own P&L. It really depends, because what that also sometimes happens is, I hate silos. So if you can sub-optimize your own P&L, you might be doing really great. Your bonus might be doing really great, but the company is going maybe in the wrong direction. I'm not a big fan of it if it leads to more silos, but if it leads to a taking better responsibility of the financial result you take in the company, it could be. Maybe it is something for me that it's for a period of time, that, for a very, it's a timeline. Some point of the company's life, maybe it's a good idea, but eventually I'm not sure if that's the right way of doing it.
And this is just a question that came up to my mind, but as because sometimes, companies talk about, okay, you have the stakeholders, you always have to please the stakeholders, like the boards, and they're always looking, at the digits, but then you have a company who maybe wants to fulfill a purpose or a good intention and wants to, accelerate innovation, and it might be a longer task. How is that usually? Maybe it doesn't even come to the board level, but I'm thinking when the figures aren't always going, black but red due to innovation process or investments of that kind.
Actually, those usually come to the board, because if the longer the investment period, the more likely it's to be talked in the board, because it usually is a bigger investment, you have timeline that one. And for me, that's not an issue per se, because you just have to have what I come back on the strategy execution. You have to ensure you have a follow-up KPI, so if you came with a plan and saying we're going to be red for 2 years and then that's white, then it's getting green, then that's great if you follow it up on that ways. So it's not in such a sense an issue. But I would like to take a word for you on the purpose. Thank you for taking it up. I think purpose, reason the company exists. Simon Sinek talks about the why. Is extremely important. And it's specifically important in transformations, because it gives an immediate thing on the boards. I'll take you 2 examples. The Santa Maria, which is for food. In order to us to turn around, we had this why which said no more boring meals. And no more boring meals suddenly requires a lot about innovation. How do you do, colorful pictures, black and white pictures? And we just walked around with that. But that was the purpose, and it was kind of aha for everybody. If the innovation they were working was not about, it was slightly boring, then you shouldn't be in the innovation. If it was inspiring and tasting and that kind of thing, then that would be in there. Purpose is extremely important. And companies without purpose are very difficult to lead and manage.
That's good to. There's also on that intention on the board level. Okay, do you have a question there that you find interesting that we haven't posed
I
yet?
haven't really been reading though.
What about? You mentioned that supply chain is seen as a cost. In my world, we are revenue enablers by providing the correct product at the correct time at the best possible cost. How can this view be changed?
By you getting out of the silo. If that is the company's view. For me, a good supply chain director can answer me to a question: what does your end user want? And if you're business to business, your end user might be a machine operator in a factory of the machine you prepared. If the supply chain does not know answer to that question, they are not value enablers. They are just manufacturing the cost. I think the revenue enabler is a great word, but it comes from understanding the both of the flows. And too often you take the approach of cost. I was black and white, so excuse me on that one. But I think that is the old way of looking at it. And the question was, how can this be changed? I think the key change really comes for you guys. I mean, you can lead the change in the company very easily. And if you just say, I can't change it, then you're in the wrong place. You should be able to change it. I gave you some hints about how to change it, but you should be able to change it. You are the one to change it.
Sanna, thank you so much for giving us this insight, for your straightforwardness, for also, encouraging men, female, boys, girls, and everything, and for conveying your knowledge. Thank you so much. A warm round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.